But you know that I didn't pass my my last year of choir in Italy. I was
Your
failed.
last year in choir in Italy.
I was failed.
You slept with the nuns or so?
I just didn't go to less.
Well, that's a good reason not to.
Well, but I usually there is no like there are so many people who do not go to.
I thought in Italy you were rewarded for such behavior, you know? Like the guy will make keep bringing.
I was sent. There were two teachers, and I was sent to the one that was kind of strict, and while all the others the majority of them were with the other teacher who didn't care. And so even if you were not going to class, you could pass the year.
But see what became of you, huh?
And what?
You're here.
Yeah, it's a permanent damage.
So you became one of the conspiracy theorists.
Choir doesn't exist.
This is something. If you would use a metronome like that, which is again never described like as such, you will have troubles, aligning the line that you want to have, the speed that you have. It's just blocked. You see, it's just behind the wave now, and so even if you would think that's the way to use it, then every intelligent human being can come to the conclusion after 2 seconds that, okay, now I'm missing it. Of course, obviously this one. It's the upper part. So hello guys, this will be a video that I have no idea how long or how short it will be, but we are going to talk about an article that was published recently on Beethoven's mysterious metronome problem, and I don't even think that the word mysterious is mentioned. The title of the article is "Conductor's Tempo Choices Shed Light Over Beethoven's Metronome." Now, we are always happy when people talk about a metronome because it is one of the best inventions ever for every musician that at least want to have an impression or wants to create an impression of how the composers originally thought about their works, because let's face it, a tempo choice is pretty important, and more you see people diving into this fascinating topic, which is really cool. Also, not really consistently, I would say, but majority of the people today dealing with metronome marks, of trying to understand them, also have passed the story of the broken metronome, and there are a lot of broken metronome stories. It's not only the metronome of Beethoven that would ever be broken, but the guy didn't know how to use it and so on. So this article is, in that respect, a little bit old-fashioned because it goes back to some theories that are actually existing for a long time about how Beethoven could have misused his metronome, and with of course the purpose to understand the metronome marks read in the modern way. We here on this channel, and it's not only on the channel is just a window of the work that we are doing right now. There is a plausibility that the metronome use was simply connected to the use of the pendulum, which goes back to the tactus, where the up-down correlates with the left-right of the pendulum and also with the left-right of the metronome. And so the metronome ticks actually, to say it in a more difficult description or explanation, they indicate the subdivision of the note value given in the metronome mark. In other words, the ticks of the metronome give the subdivision of that metronome mark. But we thought, Alberto and I thought that it was worth our time, and maybe also your time, to talk about this article, because of course it might go back to some solutions, maybe not solutions that were given in the past, but it's always interesting to see what people have to say, because maybe their way to come to that same conclusion that was given perhaps 50, I don't know, even who was the first to come with that solution of the reading below the weight instead of upside on the top of the weight, but that goes back 50, 60 years. So let's check this article and let's see what we can learn, and maybe also if this can be used to clarify also our position
absolutely.
here. So what we're going to do now, I asked Alberto. Actually, he didn't. I didn't ask him. He just did that. He summarized. He went over this article, made bullet points. So we're going to read that together. Parts of it. Alberto has some questions. Also questions that he probably wants me to answer.
Okay, so guys, what we are actually gonna do, it's a sort of analysis of this article, and I will be a little bit, how so to say, moderating sort of discussion.
That would be cool to see you in that position.
Yeah, and also show to you what kind of questions we should always ask ourselves when we approach this kind of research and articles, and why it is important to think in that way, because the most important thing is always to put everything into a certain context. And once we have that, then we can go more in detail. So I'm gonna briefly summarize this article for you. Probably most of you have already read that, because a lot of people also send that to us.
That's true, yeah. I think 4 or 5 patrons sent it to me, and then through the contact on the mailing list, I think at least 7 people sent that article to me. So
absolutely,
it has exposure, which is actually a good thing.
we assume that some of you maybe already know that, but nevertheless, for those who are not familiar with this, we are just gonna
we put a link in the description
box, of course, and we're gonna talk about that, and I will be asking some questions that are sort of open questions for you to have a critical approach to that, and also for us to start a discussion on this. So let's say that this article focuses exclusively on the so-called Beethoven's metronome problem, and the author, as many other authors that talked and wrote about this in the past, bring up the same problem. So
2 authors, I think.
The 2 authors, I should say.
Almuneda, Martin-Castro. Yeah. Sorry for mispronouncing names.
Sorry. We hope to be right
and
with
Iñaki,
that.
Ucar.
Yeah. So
it's published in a magazine. Here I have a link. +1, probably Spanish, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's a serious paper. So.
The authors talk about Beethoven's metronome problem, which is, as we all know, it's Beethoven's metronome numbers are often very fast and also on the edge of being very unplayable.
But it's actually also here in the abstract. There they say, however, these marks are still under dispute, as many musicians consider them too quick to be played and even unmusical, whereas others claim them as Beethoven's supposedly written will. In this work, we develop a methodology to extract and analyze the performed tempi from 36 complete and so on. They actually also mention somewhere below here, they mention, of course, the Hammerklavier Sonata, which is the most iconic metronome mark that's actually kind of impossible. Probably the most paradigmatic case is the Opus 106, also called Hammerklavier Sonata, which starts with a decidedly unfeasible indication of 138 beats per minute for the half note. So this and other incongruities have led many performers to ignore these figures and rely on other musical cues to determine the right tempo. Before I let you continue, this is important.
Yeah.
And whenever we talk to people, I mean, with our radical solution, remember the 100 days of 60 days that I posted every day a score with an impossible metronome mark. A lot of people say, well, listen, this is just possible.
There's no problem. Where's the problem? Yeah.
And then we made a video saying, like, listen, if we cannot agree upon the problem, then there is no discussion. And so it's great to read that actually that is acknowledged, that the metronome marks are problematic. The 106, I mean the 138 of the Opus 106 is often called as the impossible metronome mark, but if you see it in the context, and I may be cutting the grass before you feed, if you say it, that's not even the most extreme. It's actually a moderate metronome mark is seen in the entirety of metronome marks.
This is how they describe it. But they try to establish a better calculation of what's an ideal tempo by, and I quote, by analyzing a set of different performances. Our approach is ultimately based on the wisdom of crowds phenomenon. If the tempo is an arbitrary choice, we will not expect any clear pattern among romantics or HI performances should follow Beethoven's marks closely.
So correct me if I'm wrong, so they define the metronome as problematic, the numbers. They're too fast. Interesting though, they're never too slow. Huh?
Yeah, they're never too slow.
So they're too fast. They see the problem, did not ignore that, and they want to solve it by looking at the average tempi that 40 or how many, 36 performance, probably orchestras, take over a period of 70 years, hoping that average will give them actually a solution that they can use to understand Beethoven's metronome. It's an interesting idea. So it's the same law. Like who was saying, I think my daughter Sophie said, there's a law that if you have a basket with some eggs in it, and it's like either 8 or 9 or 12 eggs, you can see. If you ask 100 people to make an estimation, you know that the outcome is the average is right. What's the conclusion? Let's jump first to the conclusion. Then we go into detail.
So the conclusions are a little hard to understand, because on one hand, it's suggested that, of course, this average of tempi that came out of the study could very well be the right tempo that we should take for those performances, based on also scientific studies that actually talk about the way we perceive music and the attributes and the characteristics that make us to determine a certain tempo. So rhythm, melody, but also it's as it's mentioned here, also pitch and timbre of the instrument, and there are many things that so to say, like give a contribution to the final decision of a certain tempo.
So let me summarize. So the first conclusion is that they acknowledge the fact that parameters like instruments choice and everything can influence the tempo.
Of course.
And so there can be
as well as aspects of the music itself, so like rhythmical patterns. The other thing is, of course, another conclusion, which is actually two more conclusions. I should say. The first one is the possibility that the metronome that Beethoven used, which belong also to the first series of metronome patented by Menzel, could have had some problems. And second, the fact that Beethoven himself might not have been able to use and to set the or to read the scale on the metronome itself.
So you mean
misplacing of the
You're not reading this part, but you're reading that part.
So basically, guys, I don't know if you can see that, but in the article, it's basically argued that Beethoven might have read the number from below, or the weight, so on the scale, instead of up as we are supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, suggesting that Beethoven always read a faster metronome number and writing that on the score, which was actually a slower tempo that was, let's say, in between 10 and 50%. And at the end, they try to make a connection between the average calculation of the performances, of the tempi of the performances, with the fact that the Beethoven might have misused the metronome, and because of course.
Can I jump in here? I think it's clear. So we have the acknowledgement of the awareness of the problem, and we have the solution by maybe coming to this solution reading below the weight instead of ups. Because of the averages of the performances that they've made. So first of all, the application of that law of mass or what have you, just read it, that doesn't apply here. if I give the example of my daughter Sophia, I had it in class. I don't know what course. So when people guessing the number of eggs in the basket, their goal is to make a precise guess. They're not saying, I don't care how many eggs are in the basket, so I just turn my head and I just say 15. I don't even look. I'm ridiculizing this a little bit because that's what they've done. They have taken 70 years of performances of Beethoven.
Mm-hmm.
None of those orchestras, maybe with the exception of Gardner and Norrington, had the intention of following the metronome marks. So let's still assume that the hip orchestras have the intention, though check their tempi. I mean, they're oftentimes off, but the majority of those orchestras haven't had the intention of following the metronome marks.
Yeah.
So how can you take that average as a comment on the metronome mark of Beethoven?
Yeah, of course.
That's simply wrong. All you have to say, and I hope that the artist don't think that. I cannot assume that was their conclusion. Listen, Beethoven, your great music, your tempo sucks. We take the average of the performances over 70 years, and that's what actually your tempo should have been.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying this really black and white on this one point, and then we can continue to other points. But people do not realize that when they make those conclusions, that they actually are saying, listen, dude, you didn't know how to use this. All the treatises, all the manuals on the metronome say clearly you read it from above. And if you use a metronome daily, like I'm doing, it's really hard to read it from below. I mean, it's not designed for that. So let's practically try this out instead of just talking only about it. So let's assume that this is our tempo. So there you go. Well, we think this is a fine tempo. We take the rod, we stop the metronome, and we read 96. See? But imagine you would read the lower part of the weight. That's very hard because the number is blocked. You have to, put the rod aside and then you can read 120, but it's an estimation. You have to remember the position of the weight and then you go to 120. So it's not even practically easy. If you use a metronome like that for your entire life, there must be a moment, I think, where you ask your friends or colleagues like, hey, am I doing something wrong, right? Alberto?
Well, yeah, also you cannot see through that. So it's... where would you use it in this way? And plus, I don't know if you guys can see this, but this little gap here, it's made in a way here where I'm putting my finger. It's made in a way that you can see on what in what line the weight is actually stuck, which you don't have below. So it's pretty intuitive, the use of the weight on the rod. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I think from a practical standpoint only, this is something. If you would use a metronome like that, which is again never described like as such, you will have troubles, aligning the line that you want to have, the speed that you have. It's just blocked. You see, it's just behind the weight now, and so even if you would think that's the way to use it, then every intelligent human being can come to the conclusion after 2 seconds that, okay, now I'm missing it, of course, obviously this one. It's the upper part.
And probably if Beethoven really did this mistake, then we have to assume that all the other composers in the 19th century probably made the similar mistake because...
Used the metronome in the same way, yeah.
Yeah, they all did the same mistake and for lack of experience, of course.
And there is actually, there's no one single line in the entire 19th century. We don't need to repeat ourselves here, but there is no single line in the history of the 19th century with connecting to the metronome that actually... describes the metronome to be used like that. Okay, I think it's that alone. And before we continue, Alberto, I wonder, if you just do this practical test for 10 seconds, you must have severe doubts on this kind of, it's not even a theory, it's just an idea, because it doesn't work in practice, right?
Yeah. So it's really hard to understand this.
Okay, let's continue.
Yeah.
If Melzel came to you with the metronome, one of the first one personally, It's like, you know what I was thinking when you were saying that? Like, if I would when I bought my Volvo, I wouldn't buy it in the garage, but they came from Sweden with the head of the engineering department and saying, Wim, I'm going to explain you everything of this car. And when he left, I wouldn't know if the gear was in front. I mean, Melzel came to Beethoven with this.
Yeah.
Melzel.
And I mean, we can be pretty sure that also Melzel checked that the device he was going to give to Beethoven actually worked.
It's weird that people start from this idea without... I'm sure, I mean, if the authors are listening right now, don't think that I'm ridiculizing your work or your respect for Beethoven, but it's so deep inside us that this thing was wrongly used by Beethoven that we do not realize that the composer of the Ninth Symphony, who every morning counted 60 coffee beans for his coffee, he was freaking out if there were 61, wouldn't know how to use this, and his entire circles didn't know it. We come back to that point because that's maybe the most important one.
But also another important thing is that this is just an assumption that he might have misinterpreted the use of the
Tell me, is there in the
metronome.
article anywhere a 19th century quotation that actually says the same?
Actually not.
So what are we talking about? The entire 19th century was actually fine with those metronome marks.
Yeah, and
there are no, that's important to say. There are no, so what the article starts here with, so the assumption of the awareness that we have a problem, metronomic problem. If you think about this, you should go to the 19th century and say, did people have back then the same problem as we have? And surprise, they did not.
They did not.
The book we're writing will have over 100 quotes, and I stop with 100. The rest will go on the website. Over a period of about 100 years, not hundreds, the 19th century, so it's 85 years or 80 years, 100 quotes of musicians, editors, and teachers who talk about the metronome as an accurate, exact tempo indication. And there's nowhere one quote that is saying there is a problem with metronome marks. Even not the Moschles Hammerklavier quote that's often used.
Exactly.
So 138 was for Moschles too fast. He reduces that to 116 in the footnote of the Schindler biography, English translation. And that's been taken by people saying like the Hammerklavier is impossible. It was known that it was unplayable.
As if, by the way, as if we don't struggle to play also that 116.
Yeah, I mean, but musicians can do that.
Of course.
Musicians can do that.
But not for the entire movement with a metronome ticking.
But the point is that even that quote of Moschles doesn't say that it's unplayable. He says it's too fast for the marking of Allegro.
Yeah.
Which is correct. And Beethoven designed this as an Allegro assai. It crossed out the assai. So there is, and Czerny, by the way, played the Hammerklavier Sonata 2 or 3 weeks after completion on the private evening. He was the first, not Liszt, to play that. When he was also in not very good shape because he refused to play the Fifth Piano Concerto when Beethoven asked him somewhat later. So all to say, the 19th century does not have that problem. That should be a big red flag first. Flag. Like, we have the problem. And so what you've done is take exactly recordings in the period where people struggle with the metronome. Why? The answer,
we are gonna talk about this, but before we touch upon 2 more topics about this article, it's important. Also, I would like to read this because it's an important conclusion, and which I will say that the author puts everything a little bit together in the same.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm gonna read that, and then we are gonna see that. So we were actually reading that, but could really Beethoven have committed such a mistake? In the first page of his autograph of Ninth Symphony, there is a revealing inscription from his own hand, 108 or 120 Melzel. Some scholars have interpreted this text as proof of Beethoven's poor state of mind.
What? Well, I can imagine Peter Stadler did, But the guy...
His indecisiveness or some preliminary tempi range is still to be decided, but the big difference between these two figures makes such hesitation unlikely for a composer who so often insisted on the importance of tempo as an essential part of his music. Moreover, if Beethoven had wanted to delimit a possible tempi range, he would have written 108. How do you say the slash 120?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Not quote unquote or. As we have clarified in this work, the distance between 108 and 120 on the scale, 15 mm's, so metronome numbers.
It's more on this one, but probably
matches exactly the size of metronome's moving weight. This innocent annotation constitutes written proof that after years using the metronome, there was a moment, at least when Beethoven was not sure about how to read it. He even left his doubts annotated on the score.
I mean, sorry, I have to interrupt you. This is a peer-reviewed article?
Apparently, I guess so, because it's edited by, it was presented in October.
Okay, leave the quote here. So, I'm sorry, but this is bullshit. This is completely bullshit. When you say 108 and 120, I mean, that is written proof that's written proof for the fact that Beethoven acknowledges the fact that he doesn't know how to use a metronome, because that, surprise, it's not on this metronome. I trust that the original metronome that Beethoven had, that type of metronome, that their 108, 120 is on the scale. I mean, if I would peer review this article, then I would say citation needed, because, I mean, come on, how many musicians write on their score 2 tempi?
Yeah, as if Beethoven was not a human being that in the moment of deciding a metronome number for his piece that should have been published by the editor, didn't want to be super certain that there was like the tempo that he wanted to have.
Well, on the one hand, I mean, this is weird, and I'm sorry to be so hard, but this sentence is actually, this is like an inner circle reasoning. You claim that it's a doubt of Beethoven, and then you continue on that claim, what was in the previous paragraph a claim, as it to be a fact.
Make the connection, and suddenly that a moment where Beethoven might have been a little uncertain exactly corresponds to the weight of the and that is the proof that Beethoven didn't know how on which side to read the metronome.
This is not necessarily a moment of insecurity. This is just an option.
Yeah, an option.
I mean, if you look to Czerny metronome numbers, where is the? Then we come back to that. Where is the context on this? But focus here on this sentence. If you say that Beethoven gave written proof for his confusion, first of all, he had a direct line to Melzel. Just take the telephone and phone to me. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to ridicule the F, but how is it possible that you take that 100. This man was his own performer, and so he decided to give metronome marks in the 9th Symphony, which is of course a little more difficult than in the other symphonies.
No.
So there he writes in the manuscript 108 and 120 or 120. Well, I have news for you. That's just an option that all musicians have. And 108 to 120 is in the same range of tempo. And so just compare it to Czerny and Moschles. Their metronome marks, their set of metronome marks for their several editions. Moschles is more consistent than Czerny. Czerny, every time he made an edition, metronomized the entire works of Beethoven again. And so you see differences, and even larger than that one. So the thing is not what was in the manuscript, what was the final decision that Beethoven made. And so probably he went over this with his nephew Karl, I think, in the 9th Symphony case. I don't know for sure. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, it could be in the morning he felt 108 and in the afternoon 120. And now people will jump on me and say, yeah, but you always say you have to stick to the metronome. That's a different discussion.
Yeah.
Beethoven decided as a performer of his own music that those two tempi were he was doubting there. What am I going to take? And I don't know from memory what it became and when he sent those metronome marks to London. But the thing is that if we want to reconstruct Beethoven's metronome marks or Beethoven's tempi or Chopin's tempi, that before we make up our own mind, we have to first reconstruct their mind. And so the first thing you have to do is reconstruct that tempo indication. And you cannot say, yeah, Beethoven also had some doubt. Yeah, of course he had. Do you really think that those people
As if Beethoven was like a machine, let's say like 120. That go for it. It's done.
Yeah. Though that could be a book on its own. I mean, not to digress from that, but professional musicians still today, no matter if your name is Lisitsa Polini, Wim Winters, or Alberto Sanna, and I don't want to compare me with those musicians, but if you have worked on a piece, your tempo is set. That's also part of the reason why people don't like to talk about this, because, for Paulini, the Beethoven tempis are there in his mind. It's like it's his universe. He made it work. And so, but Beethoven 108 or 120, that's the written proof for Beethoven to be insecure how to use a metronome.
And here I'm gonna connect this to the next part of the sentence.
I'm sorry to rant a little bit, but it's a strange conclusion.
And then I'm gonna bring us to the next point. So this, and I read it from the article. This could also explain why not all of his marks are usually dismissed. Perhaps Beethoven was confused at times for his lack of experience using the device.
Beethoven, lack of experience. Well, I have news for all of us listening and watching. He had more experience using the device than all of us combined. This guy was, I've told you the coffee bean story. He was as precise as you could be. If you go through his scores, it's all there. It's all there. I remember now the story, I don't know which year it is, but Czerny played on an occasion Beethoven works, and Czerny received a letter later, and it's in his autobiography of Czerny. It's a very little book, you can read it in an hour. So Czerny writes, I don't know if you know the story.
No. So
he played for Beethoven, and apparently Beethoven humiliated him in front of the public because, and don't quote me on that, read it, but he added some little embellishments, and I think he missed some pianos or fortes, and Beethoven must have said, like, what an idiot are you, how dare you to touch my music for literally nothing. Today it would go unnoticed even in the highest level competition. For Beethoven, it was enough to humiliate his best friend, student, in front of an audience so badly and that's unseen for him. No, he apologized more, but he apologized with sitting on both of his knees in that letter. Like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. So we are saying here that Beethoven was not always made up his mind on tempo, which is the most important thing.
Because of lack of experience.
Are
we still talking about the guy who wrote the Ninth Symphony?
Well, but I'm sure that these authors do not make that connection that hard. But in fact, you should be aware, if you say that, Beethoven enters the room, well, when you are presenting this article, you would stop. You would not read that. I'm sorry. You were not very precise with the device. You couldn't make up your mind.
Sorry, Ludwig.
Yeah, but if you put it this way, it becomes clear that how difficult is it to just accept that this metronome marks was the most exact tempo indication that we have, and if we don't solve it, then we have to find another solution. When you present the facts, then you should say, okay, there's 108 to 120 or 120. What could it mean? What's the most obvious thing that it could mean?
The Beethoven was a little uncertain about what tempo he wanted to have on the score, or the fact that he didn't know how to position the weight on the rod of the metronome. Yeah, but and the other thing is like, and now we are just going more. We go more on detail on the analysis with a few questions on this. And the main question is, this metronome problem was something that that relates only Beethoven. Was Beethoven eventually the only one that presented super fast and unplayable metronome numbers? Was he the only one with maybe a metronome that was not functioning? Was the only one who misinterpreted how to set the speed on the scale? The answer is no, he wasn't. There are a lot of, I will say, most of the composers of the 19th century or editors or performers that present metronome numbers that have the exact same problem. And this brings...
Beethoven is a moderate problem.
Yeah, and Beethoven is still a moderate problem, and in which this brings us to the next point. And it's one of the problems with this article, it's that it makes something very dangerous, which is in a way misleading maybe somebody who doesn't know much about the metronome numbers in the 19th century. It might be very well presented this as if as it's a problem that belongs only to Beethoven, which is not. It's a problem that belongs to most of the people, of the composers who metronomized their works in the 19th century. All of them with the same problem. And the question is, can this solution be applied to all of them as well? Were they all incapable of this?
That's an excellent way of putting it, because you said at the beginning, we have to put this kind of research in the context of the time. And now, indeed, what you say is as if Beethoven has had his own universe, where actually everybody knew that he was misusing his metronome, but because he was such a genius, they just actually also used their metronome in the wrong way, not to expose him, and that for 4 generations. It's maybe the most important missing element here. How does this relate to other metronome marks? Start with Beethoven's circle. I mean, go to Czerny, you have the most metronome marks are about Czerny. Go to Mosles, go to Kalkbrenner, Chopin. Chopin was in Vienna in right after. Go to Schubert, his famous opera. I mean, compare metronome marks that are comparable, and I mean by that, go to similar notation structures and patterns and compare metronome marks, and what you will see is in the entire 19th century for publications, and we're not talking about performances, but publications of music of the past, that those metronome marks are pretty similar. Yeah. Pretty similar.
They're all in line. And by the way, whenever you also find that, for example, one of the biggest points is also the transcriptions of the symphonies. Nobody of Liszt, Czerny, or whoever made a transcription of a Beethoven symphony changed that metronome numbers.
No.
Nobody talks about those metronome numbers being problematic in the 19th century.
And then they say, of course, but they just copied those metronome marks, not with the intention to play. They've made a video on that. That's like saying, hey, I'm putting this metronome mark here on the transcription
with
for
the intention
you
not to follow that.
I mean, that makes no sense. And if it makes sense, then we come back to the 108.
You see these pieces in A major, it doesn't matter. You can play in A minor. It's not meant to be in A major. I mean, it's the same. I mean, whether we take everything that they write seriously or we don't.
Yeah, but the point is, if you want to make that case for the transcriptions, it's as the same as here in the 108 or 120. If you want to say those metronome marks were published in the transcriptions not with the intention to follow, or Beethoven wrote that on the score of the 9th Symphony because he wasn't sure how to use a metronome. If you want to make that statement, you have to prove your case by historical quotations.
Yeah.
There must be someone in the 19th century who have mentioned that. And so the case for our alternative use of the metronome, just compared to the tactus and the pendulum, is so strong from the opposite side, because there are no quotations, there are no sources in the 19th century who points to the same problem as we do, as the authors here do. There was no metronomic problem in the 19th century. There was a metronomic problem in the 20th century and in the 21st century, and that alone should. But for these things, we have to quote.
And that, of course, brings me to my next question: is why the authors didn't mention that this is a problem that involves not only Beethoven, but a lot of musicians of the 19th century.
Well, that's really missing here, because if you isolate a problem and you isolate it from its entire context of its time, in this case the time of the composer itself and the era and the place, I mean, then it's not so hard to find some lines here and there and to come here to a handwritten statement 108 or 120 that by accident proves what you actually are looking for.
Yeah.
This falls apart from the moment you just cross-reference with someone like Czerny.
Yeah.
Because guess what? If you think Beethoven is problematic, well, I have bad news for you. There is some more, I wouldn't use the word, but shit happening later. I mean, it's all going up. It's all in the era of industrialization where people were playing faster and faster and faster. And you see that Czerny etudes, even for average beginners, are unreachable today. So one cross-reference here, and this entire universe, micro-universe falls apart. This can only survive. I'm sorry to be so hard on this work, because I get it. These authors worked hard on this, but it's in the system of today. But this can only be peer-reviewed and published because everybody shares the same bias against that metronome. Everybody accepts the idea that those metronome marks are problematic and are not correct and needs correction. But what you have to do as a researcher is just go back in time and see again, I repeat myself, but it's so important. Was the problem apparent in those days? No. Why did people give those metronome marks? Is there any alternative solution that we can apply? And now I come to a point, I don't know if you mentioned that. Where is your overview of your research history? I mean, I get it. This is just an article, but even in an article with as serious as this, you should make us clear to us what did you read about it? What did you hear about it? You're not going to tell me that in 2020, when you do this kind of research, that you do not know about our work. When you type in Beethoven and just think about hitting the M, my channel and my website is popping up. So it's fine if you think that what we do is not correct, but at least you should mention it, and you should have the courage as well to, debunk that. The problem is that it's not possible, because if I have to choose between reading this upside down and not knowing and be confused, and Beethoven not knowing how this music to sound, or just say, listen, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
And there was actually what I was going into, if
you made the point of the research. Great job.
It's solved.
I'm sorry.
It's solved. Sorry. Let's bring it home. No, the point was if you are trying to solve a problem, because I guess we are on the same side here. We are trying to solve a problem, and so you definitely should also talk about what's the research history on this problem, and then what solutions have been brought up. Whether it doesn't matter if those solutions are always convincing, or I will say whether you agree with that or not, but you should mention them. For example, even Talsma.
Yeah.
Talsma
Sure.
we don't agree with that.
It's not about agreement. Talsma has also worked upon premises that were before. So, but you build steps on steps, and Talsma made mistakes.
Yeah.
But that's not the problem.
But you say why that for certain aspects work, why for certain aspects doesn't work. But you talk about that because you need to also, I guess, the purpose of the article is to inform somebody who never possibly heard about this, and probably you are presenting a problem, and the reader wants to know, okay, but what are the solutions that have been presented until now?
And why do they not hold? And I'm talking about our channel website. I mean, The Book of Lorenz, Guardian, Dr. Penderschlag was published in 2010 and a peer-reviewed publishing house. So that's a peer-reviewed book of 220 pages. I don't know. It's coherent. It's, of course, our book will be with him, what we're writing with him will be much enlarged. But you cannot do as if you haven't seen that. Because, I mean, if you haven't seen that, I mean, then we are talking about research that
is incomplete.
That's really incomplete. And the people of the peer review board should have known that, because I dare to imagine that people who are on the board there are experts in this kind of research, so they know the work. And it's fine if you not agree with that. But this is not a matter of I agree with you or not. This is you present facts, and I take those facts, and those facts do not hold, because it's not even our work. I see in the list of references also Martin Nortuyn's thesis on Beethoven's tempi.
Which, by the way, it's claims a little bit the opposite, that there's no way that those composers, especially Beethoven and Czerny, were making a mistake on the.
But that's my point. So if that's in the reference list, which it should, I mean,
of course,
Nortuyn did important work. We not agree with his conclusions, and of course that has implications also what we believe is the core value of his work. But what he did is really make an end on the narrative that there was something wrong with the metronome, that Beethoven used it wrongly. If you mention that work in your sources, then I want to know why you do not agree with him.
Yeah.
Why? What makes you think that Nortuyn is not right on this point?
Yeah.
We can conclude by that this thesis and this conclusion, as small as the universe you created around Beethoven, as if he was not influenced by anyone else, as if he never had contact with contemporary musicians, with students, with editors. He was constantly writing to the most prominent editors, that no one of them would ever have said to him, like, listen, Jude, your metronome marks, you will be mad at me, but aren't you reading below and said, because I cannot play them. It's even more, Alberto.
Yeah.
When Beethoven, he was, just a story, he was always fighting with Breitkopf and Hertel, because he said to him in a letter, and don't quote me on that, but something like, do you really enjoy making publications with so many mistakes? You promise me next time you send everything back to me, and I have an evenings here. That's how they checked. Evenings where people came and played the composition or the print. And so mistakes, he hurt them. He was not completely deaf. But anyways, so they played them. Yeah. And so no one there would have mentioned that there was something wrong. And then I come to my point. What you've done actually is creating your own world.
Yeah.
That falls apart from the moment that even Nortuyn, I mean, that thesis, overlay that with this article, and I'm sorry to say, but it pulverizes that.
Yeah, but also there's a sort of another problem emerging in this work, which the authors say at the same time, which is, I'm not gonna read that, but you guys can find in the article. It says, analyzing all these recordings, what has been brought up is that basically none of these performances follow the metronome numbers.
Yeah, but that's their point, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But even and then the problem becomes even bigger, because it says even the fastest performances on this group of people of recordings that we analyzed, that this fastest performance belonged always to the hip movement. Also, those were often below the metronome numbers, and at that point also one super helpful thing to do would have been like, okay, maybe we don't have recordings of the 19th century, but maybe we can read what was a little bit the performance practice on the 19th century, or how that was often reviewed, and how was that related to the composer's intentions, which of course are identified as the metronome numbers. And all in a sudden they will see, as we brought up on the channel, that very often the reviews of concerts in the 19th century complained about musicians playing the works of these composers too fast. So in a way, faster than those metronome numbers that already for us today are impossible.
And explicitly pointing sometimes to the metronome mark, even the symphonies. We brought a Fink story, Tomacek, Don Giovanni Fink. That's the most explicit story. Well, Don Giovanni in the metronomization of Fink is too fast for our musicians. You find on internet forums people screaming like it's all fine. It's not. We cannot play that. But yet, in 1840, there is the guy who said, like, yeah, but you're playing this way too fast, calling to Tomacek, give me metronome marks to prove how much slower it was in the past. Tomacek gave metronome marks, and guess what? Those metronome marks are unperformable
But this is super important, because in this article, it creates a little bit the narrative that, okay, then we just take an average tempi of recordings, and probably that's the one that it's what the composer actually intended. It's not what's it documented in the 19th century. It's said there are the performers who play in a way that is very often faster than composer's intentions, which are represented by the metronome numbers. So it's not that in the 19th century they said, okay, there's a majority of people that plays that tempo, so that must be the right tempo. No. They said.
So that's important what you say. So let's clarify this. These metronome marks are being set here as problematic, which is a great thing to do, because I can promise you now,
at least we agree on this common ground. They are problematic.
The more that our work is out there, the less people are going to talk about problematic metronome marks, because what happens if they're problematic and if they are accurate tempo indications, as Noorten also together with us claims, well, then we have a problem, because then we have to be able to play them. But the problem doesn't end there. As Alberto was saying, in the 19th century, you have a lot of reviewers who were opposing the increasing speed of performance practice. Today, we think that speed decreases, but that would be hard to explain in the times where everything got louder and faster, and where virtuosity was coming to a high point. So the opposite is true, and you can read that in a lot of reviews and just contemporary witnesses. But those reviews that say, listen, dude, the metronome marks are there, why are you playing so much faster? So we have not only to explain these metronome marks to be playable, but also add 30, 40, 50% to it.
Yeah.
And then we come to an absurdity where we say, okay, now let's clear the table. Is there something that we were missing? And yeah, there is. You take the metronome and you have 1 and 2. And then people are screaming, but that's getting too slow. No, it isn't. We just published the 32 sonatas. The sonatinas need to be done, the opus 49. And we will have the 8 symphonies. Now, you can say, I don't like it, but it's not too slow. I mean, we like it very much, and a lot of people like it too.
Yeah, but also it's still...
the other thing is not possible.
The other way, it's not an opinion. That's a fact. We cannot play that. It's too slow. That comes from an opinion, which is a bias in a way, because of course we grown up with listening to this music in this way. So if it's different, we analyze that with our bias, with our previous opinion, but that cannot be an argument for an actual research.
No, and that's a good point, also a point that Noorten makes. But of course, everybody makes the point that music and musicality is something subjective, shouldn't be involved in tempo research. Noorten once said, like, your opinion in tempo research, you have to leave it at the front door. Okay, but that's as long as that we start to play everything in this silly theory that works. And then people say, but that's of course unmusical. I mean, I'm sorry. I thought we had to leave that at the front door only if an alternative solution. That points to a much slower tradition. I mean, how surprising is it that in the pre-industrial times that people didn't play like the Polini and Lizitsas today? How surprising is that? And I get it that these authors are just in this system. I was there too. Don't take this wrong. We want contact with people who take metronome serious. So we want to work together with everybody, because we serve a common cause. I mean, but wouldn't you expect, and that's my question to you, that now after this video statement, that actually we should work together.
Yeah.
And I hope that. But my fear is that the ranks will be closed.
Yeah.
And that's something I don't understand. what do we have to lose with our solution on music written 200 years ago, as if it is my music or your music of your music. It's Beethoven's music. And if we are really, really, I mean, truly, feeling this need to pay this man and all the other composers honor by reconstructing his music, then we should clear the table.
Yeah. And then finally, like one open question that we all should ask ourselves is why so often we see that it's all fine if we aim to reconstruct these tempi by going faster. It doesn't matter if we can never match those metronome numbers, but as long as we try to go to the limits faster and faster, it's all okay. And then when you have a solution that solves all problems, but it just requires to play slower, that's not okay. Why is that?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that. So it's an open question for anybody who watches this video. But why is that not possible? Why going to a direction that we know that it's not possible to use to solve the problem? It's okay. And then why not going to the direction that solves all the problems at once? It's not possible at all.
And then come back to something that, I mean, we talk about fact. This is a fact. The metronome mark is a fact.
You cannot even say that it's not documented. So it's it's highly documented.
Yeah, that's true. But my final point is, and I don't know the history of these two people as a musician or musicologist. I just saw a picture in the Spanish newspaper where there was a stage with the Steinway where I think one of the researchers was about to play. But it doesn't matter. Maybe those pictures are sometimes mismatched. But you cannot do this research with the Steinway. I mean, I have nothing against music of Beethoven, even Bach on the Steinway. That doesn't matter. That's a choice. But if you do this research, you have to go to a Viennese piano, at the bare minimum a Broadwood 16 or so. But you have to play that music on these pianos. And guess what? The first repeated note and your research stops in this modern reading of the metronome because it's not possible. There's not one, if you go to Czerny's etudes, there's no one etude of Czerny that you can play at tempo. If you could reach the speeds on that action. I mean, we could go on and on forever.
Yeah.
So I think the conclusion is for this article, it's always great to see people talk about the seriousness of the metronome marks. I have to be honest, I don't understand why in 2020 this kind of assumption theory needs to be developed. With a little bit of homework, you would have seen that this was developed a long time ago, and everybody on the slow side, I would say, or the ultra fast side, is agreeing about the fact that Beethoven did not misuse his metronome, that his metronome was just fine, that it's actually impossible to I mean, how you can misuse it? Everybody is agreeing on that. So I don't understand why this year this article gets published first with so many weak spots. Cross-reference everything, use the right instruments, set your premises right, use the right tools. Don't make averages of an orchestra that actually do not even have the intention to play in the metronome mark. Okay, I get it, it's maybe something else. But that this then gets published and so much attention, why what, for instance, Lawrence Guardians did, could not have been destroyed and debunked as fast as possible. It's unbelievable. Yeah. That's something I truly do not understand. Yeah. The only thing I can say about that, the world is not ready for a reconstruction of what musically happened 200 years ago. Yeah. We are just not ready for that as a community.
Last thing, we would like to specify that, if we are talking about this, it's because it's important that we realize that we all have the same intentions, which is solve the problem. And so the fact that we have a different opinion doesn't mean that we are not open to talk with all of you on the other side of the
True, but it's not an opinion.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I should. Yeah,
it's just we point to some facts and
point to some facts.
And let me say that I can say it. I mean, of course we want to talk with everybody, but guys, I'm talking now to the authors. you knew us. I mean, you could have reached out to us,
Yeah.
or to me, or to Lawrence. You could have at least asked the question, what do you think about it? What do you think are the weak spots? Not mentioning with one word what we are doing, what Lawrence Guardian did, even what you say, what Telsma did, is, well, I'm sorry to say, but it's pretty weak. It's like, let's not pretend that it exists and hopefully that goes away. That's not how we work. That's not how science works. Imagine that people were inventing now a vaccine like that. You made some progress, but I haven't seen it because we go back to the 1930 solution. That worked also before World War II. I mean, I'm sorry to put it that black and white, but it's a little bit the same. You go back to something that was actually invented 60 years ago, debunked a lot of times, also doubts the credibility of someone who wrote the Ninth Symphony. I mean, think about it. Just think about it. So you have responsibility when you publish these articles. And so what we have done is taken our responsibility and also make people clear why in our eyes this article, as great as authors and musicians and musicologists you can be, actually did not deserve to be published. And we might actually also write an article to the paper and say, like, this is our way we see it. I don't know if you're going to do that. It also always has this kind of atmosphere of context that we want to go to war and that we are arrogant, and we are not. But what needs to be called out in this way, you've published, you made your point, that deserves...
It's never personal, it's just the willing to work on a solution. And
we know how it feels when people get personal, and we get it every day.
So we are not really fighting anybody. We are working, and then we are always happy when somebody wants to come here and talk to us.
Well, yeah, and the Tempo book is coming. It's reaching its... I say it always, it's like almost finished, but there are new aspects all the time. But let's say 75% has been written. And we're really talking about a book of in the normal format of 500 pages. We have to see how to reduce that or just co-publish it on the website. I don't know, but it will be... Yeah. Will be a project on its own publishing that. Okay, guys, this was a way too long video, but we touched upon a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
And just take from it what you want. We don't want to impose anything.
Yeah.
We want you to think for yourself and also hope for the authors of this article who did a lot of effort. We are all here in for the same, but we should find a way, not only to find common ground because that's too far away, but just to really, really embrace the same goal, which is reconstructing that music. Okay, that was it for today.
Yeah, let's take it home.
Up for the next video. We thank you all for watching. If you are here still with us, it either means that you are a long time here and already subscribed, or just found us through this link that we have for the article. Either way, we're happy to have you here as a subscriber. Hit that bell icon also because we have regular new content. And as always, for people who wants to be really with us, Patreon is there to support us. And there is a wonderful community of 150 people now waiting for you. We have monthly hangouts. There's a lot of information I share there, also in Dropbox folders, and probably something more that I forget. Anyways, thank you for watching. We see each other very soon again. Bye.
Bye, guys.
If you enjoyed what you've just watched, do subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and consider supporting us on Patreon. We need all of you to continue our fascinating musical journey back in time. Thanks for watching. We see each other soon again. Bye.